Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Jim Jorgenson, and today I'm joined by Visante 340B experts, Angela Ianni and Nivedha Poondi, to address a variety of 340B questions submitted by our audience. Before we get into the questions, though, Angela and Nivedha, can you please give our audience a little of your bio? What do you do now, and how'd you get there? And let's go Angela first, and then Nivedha.
Sure. Thanks, Jim. I'm Angela Ianni. I am currently a managing director at Visante. I've been with Visante for about 3 years. Prior to coming to Visante, I've been a leader in hospital and health systems in various roles. I did actually start as a real pharmacist for 7 years in my career and then got into leadership. I have been director of inpatient pharmacy for the majority of my beginning management career, and then got into pharmacy supply chain over the last 10 years prior to coming to Visante, where I really focused a lot on 340B, vendor relations, wholesaler agreements, procurement, just in general. And then came to Visante to help clients here with 340B and supply chain.
Excellent. Thank you.
Awesome. Hi, Jim. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited for our conversation today. A little bit background on me. I'm originally from Illinois. I went to pharmacy school at the University of Illinois in Chicago. And when I was there, I sort of jumped right into the world of 340B. I felt like I had sort of early hands-on experience with 340B, working as a 340B analyst at UI Health. And that really gave me a front row into the program's complexity, but also the impact that it has for our patients. From there, I knew that I wanted to grow in pharmacy leadership, so I went ahead and completed a pharmacy administration and leadership residency at UNC in Chapel Hill. And now at Visante, I work as a consultant on our 340B optimization team with Angela. And I've been here for a little over a year now. And, we're really helping hospitals and health systems across the nation really develop their 340B strategy, and also just helping them stay sustainable for the long haul.
Perfect. These sessions where we do the audience questions are always a lot of fun because it does give us some insight into kind of what's keeping people up at night. So let's jump right into the audience questions. First question, the 340B landscape seems to be shifting rapidly. Can you give us a sense of what's going on in this space right now and what challenges covered entities are facing?
Sure, I'll take that one. I agree. The landscape is changing rapidly. I would say in the last 5 years, we've seen a lot of change in the program. Starting in 2020, I think we started to see the manufacturers place restrictions on contract pharmacy access, and that was new at the time. Since that started, we've certainly seen state governments starting to pass laws to restore that access to the contract pharmacies, along with passing laws to report certain elements of 340B programs as an effort to increase program transparency. CMS also recently announced its plans to shift the 340B program from HHS oversight to CMS in 2026. And that is new. I mean, since the program's inception, the program has been under HHS. So this would be yet another change to the program, and remains unclear how or if that will change or alter the program in any way. There's been some recent federal changes to Medicaid eligibility, along with renewed interest by the government to bring back some Medicare reimbursement cuts to 340B Medicare Part B drugs, similar to what we saw in 2018. And last but certainly not least, there's the Inflationary Reduction Act's impact to 340B. That's been looming on how that will impact 340B. And that brought on probably the most impactful change that we're seeing yet, which is the rebate model pilot that will start in January 2026. So a lot of moving parts in the landscape, particularly in the last 5 years. It's been challenging.
Definitely. Let's pick up on that rebate issue, because that is a major change that we're seeing, is that transition towards a rebate model. So can you walk us through what that model might actually look like and how it's going to be different from a traditional 340B model?
Yeah, I mean, I've been letting everyone know. I feel like right now there's more we don't know about the model versus what we do know. I'll start with what we do know. We know this is a pilot that will start in January 2026 and will last for a minimum of 1 year. So that pilot cycle will last for 1 year. The 10 medications that are included in this pilot are the medications identified in the 2026 CMS Medicare drug pricing negotiation list. And it includes all payers, not just Medicare. Essentially, at a high level, the program is moving from receiving an upfront discount, meaning that covered entities have been able to purchase at a discounted 340B price upfront, which is how the program has operated since its inception. And we're moving into a retrospective rebate. So this means now, or starting in January, for those 10 medications, covered entities will purchase the medication at a higher cost, or what we call wholesale acquisition price, and submit a claim to the manufacturers in order to get that rebate. And that rebate would equal the difference between the price they paid at the higher price wholesale acquisition and the 340B price. So that difference will be the rebate that they receive. There's some other information we know about the timelines for manufacturers to get their processes approved and timelines for covered entities submitting claims and manufacturers getting that rebate back to the covered entities. I'm not going to get into that in this podcast, but it's all available in the Federal Register that was posted soon after the announcement.
You know, one of the things I did see this week from Kaufman Hall was that hospital operating margins did improve a bit. They moved up from about 1.6% to about 3.7%. But this whole rebate model really concerns me just in terms of the impact it might have on hospital cash flow. So, you know, what should covered entities be doing now to think about preparing for this rebate model?
Yeah, and it's tough because we don't have all the information yet. So, preparing for it the best that you can, in my opinion, right now is number one, staying updated on communications as they come out. There is much more for us to learn, and I think things will trickle in. So staying up to date on the latest information, I think, is really important. Covered entities can look at their 340B purchases for those 10 medications that are included in the pilot and determine the financial impact of purchasing those medications at that upfront price and prepare their leaders for what that's going to look like. Like you mentioned, Jim, it's going to be a financial burden for them and a change in what they're currently experiencing. So making sure that your leaders are involved in what that's going to look like, and then estimating what that 340B savings will be post January 1, 2026. Also, probably most importantly, I'm sorry, Jim, but also most importantly that they can do is advocate as much as possible. So there's a comment period right now happening with HRSA. Please comment. I think it's really important that covered entities are making their voice known and the voice of their patients. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I would make a pitch too. If you haven't contacted your hospital lobby force yet, that's always a good idea to get in touch with them to make sure that they're up to speed on all the nuances associated with this program and how that might tie into other lobbying efforts that they have going on.
Great.
So let's shift our focus to DSH sustainability. I know there's a lot of concern with potential cuts to Medicaid. And for those who may be less familiar, can you tell us some of the key elements that determine if a hospital qualifies for the 340B program and why that DSH percent is so important?
Yeah, Jim, I'll take this one. So when we talk about 340B eligibility for hospitals, there's a few core building blocks that we have to look at first. So first, eligibility looks at things like what's your hospital's entity type, what's your hospital's ownership status, and what's their relationship with the state or local government. Those are some of the baseline requirements that we have to meet first. But then on top of that, certain hospital designations have to meet a specific DSH percentage. So the DSH percent here really comes from something called the disproportionate share patient percent, or DPP. And this number combines two things. First, it takes a look at the share of your inpatient days for Medicare patients who also qualify for SSI. And then it looks at the share of your inpatient days for Medicaid patients. It combines both of those to help you calculate your DPP, which then helps you calculate your DSH percent. Different hospitals, different types of entities really are going to have different DSH thresholds that they have to meet. So for example, if you're a rural referral center, you're going to need a DSH percent of 8% or higher. But if you're a disproportionate share hospital, then you have to have a DSH percent that's greater than 11.75%. But the key takeaway here is that it's not enough to just meet that ownership or those designation requirements. Every piece of that puzzle has to be in place, including hitting your DSH percent target. And you really need that to be able to both qualify for 340B, but then also to sustain it in the future.
And I'll mention, those pieces that Nivedha was talking about comes from various contacts within the organization too. So, it's important that you have all the right people at the table when you're looking at that.
Yeah. So in that context, how do you think the recent passage of the OBBA might affect 340B hospitals in that DSH qualification?
That's a great question, Jim. I think, the OBBBA doesn't directly target 340B, but it could definitely impact hospitals' DSH percentages. So one thing is clear, there's no boost to DSH adjustments that are outlined within this act, right? In fact, what we see is that most hospitals will likely see some downward pressure to their DSH adjustments. But the effects are really going to vary by state, especially between states that have expansion and non-expansion states. And that's going to determine how they handle those changes, especially with regards to federal matching funds. But the bill focuses more on who qualifies for Medicaid. Like, for example, it looks at adding work requirements, or it looks at other eligibility restrictions rather than really outright cutting rates. So what this could mean is you could have fewer Medicaid patients for hospitals that are serving a general low-income population. So, think of those people that are serving your general low-income areas versus hospitals that are serving more categorically eligible groups. So think like NICU or psych patients. So those hospitals might feel less of an impact compared to the ones described first. But even without direct rate cuts that are implicated, there are reduced funding from a federal level that might push these states to lower reimbursement or limit their provider taxes. And many states use that to boost their hospital payments, so you can expect some sort of impact there. But all of this together could put more hospitals at risk of falling below their 340B eligibility threshold as a whole.
Great. What overall trends or challenges are you seeing for hospitals trying to maintain their 340B eligibility today?
Yeah, so one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing for hospitals trying to maintain their 340B eligibility right now is you get this double hit of both having a declining SSI and a declining Medicaid percentage. So let's start with the SSI group, right? So this is the Supplemental Security Income Program. It's there to help people who are aged, who are blind, and disabled and have limited income. And across the country, what we're seeing is that these SSI rates are dropping, and that's going to directly pull down a hospital's DSH percentage. But the tricky part here is that SSI is one of those numbers that hospitals can't really control that well because it's something that's published by CMS on an annual basis. It's usually published around April, March timeframe. And so you wait for it to drop and then you go with what you have. And so because of this, how SSI is defined is something that's actually been frequently debated in the court. So most recent Supreme Court case actually happened in April of this year, and I think it serves as a good example. So in this court case, the hospitals argued that all Medicare all Medicare patients that are eligible for SSI should be counted in the DISH equation, even if they didn't get some sort of cash payment during their actual inpatient stay. But the court actually ended up siding with HHS and said that only patients who actually received a cash payment during their inpatient hospital stay can be counted towards the DISH equation. And that, of course, as you can imagine, is going to make the SSI proportion even smaller. And then there's Medicaid, right? So that's the SSI side. But if we look at the Medicaid side, we've also seen those percentages drop too, especially after the public health emergency ended. So when states started doing their Medicaid recertifications again in 2023 and 2024, some of those patients who had previously qualified during the pandemic for Medicaid now lost their coverage. So when you put those two things together, having lower SSI rates and having lower Medicaid rates, you have two downward forces now on your DISH percentage, which can quickly put eligibility at a risk for 340B. And so, those two things aside, the last piece that I want to comment on is something that I feel is totally within a hospital's control, unlike an SSI. And that's really tracking. So a lot of hospitals rely on outside groups to help watch their DISH percent and help them file their Medicare cost report, which is totally fine. But if leadership isn't checking that number, that DISH percentage throughout the fiscal year, it's easy to get blindsided. We've seen several hospitals realize that they've sort of fallen below that threshold, but they realize it only at the end of the fiscal year when there's not that much you can do to fix it at that point. And so the organizations that really do their best here are the ones that track their DISH percent in real time, and they treat it sort of like a key performance indicator and not just a once a year report. So they're aware of where they stand throughout the fiscal year, and they can make changes to impact that number.
We've also seen the data, we've also seen that there, some organizations have consultants which they believe are there to help their DISH percent. But in reality, sometimes the consultant's goal is really more to look to find maybe an alternative payer than Medicaid that might bring back more reimbursement versus the bigger picture of how do I get more of my patients on Medicaid for that DISH.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important to think of this not just from a reimbursement perspective, but in the long run, what impacts does having DISH eligibility do for having the right DISH percentage do for your 340B program eligibility? So that's a good point, Angela.
So in addition to tracking that DISH adjustment percentage, what advice would you give to hospitals and health systems trying to stay resilient in the face of such DISH eligibility volatility?
Yeah, it's hard. When we look at DISH eligibility for our clients, we like to focus on a 4-point strategy, and we really like to take a holistic view of DISH sustainability. So step 1, like you said, Jim, start tracking. If you don't know what your DISH percentage is every single month, you're kind of going in blind. And it's really important to set up a reliable monitoring process. Make sure you're pulling in the latest SSI that CMS just released. Make sure you're internally tracking your Medicaid rates and put those together so you have a baseline DISH to measure any changes against. So let's say, you decide to implement a strategy that will potentially help your DISH percentage. Well, you're not going to know if it actually helped if you don't know where your DISH percentage stood at the very beginning to see if that made an impact at all. So it's really important to have that baseline tracking in place. Step 2, optimize what you already have. So before you start looking at new services or new programs, make sure that you're counting all of your eligible patient days. Make sure you're optimizing your existing workflows, and make sure you're framing your data to actually reflect your true patient mix. It's really important to start looking at what you already have and making sure that all of those are optimized before you look at things to add on at that point. And that brings us to step 3. where you start to think about short-term strategic solutions that are going to impact your current fiscal year and potentially beyond, right? And so once you have some of those basics from step 1 and step 2 in place, this is when you start thinking about, your growth plans and making sure that you align some of those growth plans with Medicaid access that also meet your community's needs. Once you have that in place, you can move on to step 4, where you start to think about your more longer term solutions. And here you're really looking at structurally redesigning your hospital. So you start to look at hospital pairings, consolidations, and really other strategies that are going to take more time to implement compared to the other things we've talked about, but they're really going to set up your hospital for longer term sustainability. And the goal with all of these strategies here is really to be proactive. If you start to build the strong base, the strong foundation, right? And you optimize what you have and you grow in the right areas, you're going to set yourself up for longer term success, and you'll be in a stronger position to weather some of those ups and downs that you see with DISH eligibility and the OBBA that we talked about earlier.
So who inside a health system needs to be involved in these conversations and strategies? And what do you see in organizations that really manage this well?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think sometimes people think that monitoring and improving the DISH percentage belongs to one department, like finance, for example. But the reality is several different groups across the hospital have to come together to be able to make any of the strategies that we talked about earlier actually happen. So this includes people from finance, rev cycle, case management, pharmacy, physician advisors, right? Like making sure you have all those clinical pieces in place. And of course, C-suite leadership to get everyone on board with these strategies and make sure we're pushing things along in the right direction. But really, each group has a piece of this puzzle, and the organizations that really manage this well are the ones that create space for open communication and make sure they're aligned early on what they need to do. So when you get everybody on the same page about, what's the goal here? What DISH percentage do we need to hit? What's the strategy that we're going to use to get there? And what's the individual action items that each group is going to have to make this happen? We find that decisions happen a lot faster and that workflows happen more smoothly to make that happen.
Maybe a follow-up to that, with so many expanding data requirements in terms of state requirements and contract pharmacy submission requirements and manufacturer requirements, what are you guys seeing in terms of staffing and organizations' abilities to keep up with all this?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it's definitely placing a burden on the hospitals and hospital systems. There's no doubt.
Yeah. I think, we're not looking past the fact that this takes a lot of effort and a lot of alignment from different groups across the hospital to be able to push an effort like this. But I think, when you have the right people involved and you recognize the impact that losing DISH is going to have for your hospital, or losing 340B access would have to your hospital, then you realize that you need to get the right players involved and the right staffing involved to make this happen. Initially, I think there's a bigger challenge because you're figuring out how to get things started from scratch, right? But once you start putting things in place and have workflows that you're monitoring, looking at your patient utilization, looking at how your numbers are tracked and how your data is being reported, all of these things come in place. It starts to get smoother as time goes on, and you start to define a process that's more replicable for others to continue in the future.
With so much change happening in the 340B program, what's your big picture takeaway for covered entities that are really trying to stay grounded and strategic in such a rapidly evolving landscape?
I'll take this one. I think it's really important. I know Nivedha has said this also, to be proactive with any upcoming changes. I mean, we've outlined a couple here, but there are more. So being as proactive as you can, for example, with the rebate model we talked about, trying to model out the best you can, quantify the impact for your hospital. Nivedha mentioned just getting in front of Dish, even just starting with who's tracking this, where is someone keeping tabs on our Dish percent? And then also engaging your leaders in the changes so that they're aware and can help you navigate. I think that's critical. And I'll also end with probably focusing on what you can control. And I'll take this back to most likely the 340B program. Going back to the basics, making sure that your shop is running as efficiently as possible in the areas that you can control. I had a previous boss who called these like the blocking and tackling skills, right? Like just what are the core fundamental components of the 340B program that you want to make sure are working so that you can see that value back in your organization? That would be tasks such as making sure that your TPA is properly maintained so that eligible transactions that should be coming through your program are, and they're not getting blocked. Monitoring your WAC spend, just making sure that you're minimizing that where possible. Really just focusing on those items, just basics, what can you control? And then last but not least, definitely advocacy. We've talked about this, especially during this rebate pilot time, with all the federal changes that are happening that Nivedha outlined, even with affecting Dish. I think it's really important that your voice is heard for your organization and for your patients.
Yeah, and I'll add, everything that we've talked about today, whether that's manufacturer rebates or Dish sustainability, I think it's all pieces of a much bigger picture. But the goal with all of these discussions are really the same, and that's protecting 340B so hospitals can keep investing in patient care. So I think these programs are really powerful tools, but only if the leaders are proactive, like Angela said, about monitoring trends, understanding how policies are shifting, and really adapting their strategy for what needs to happen.
Yeah, I think it's so critical to the point you both made about making sure that senior leadership is informed of this stuff, because there are so many subtle nuances and risk points associated with this program that you really can't expect the senior leaders to know them all, but to keep them as informed as you can, because no one likes surprises in this area. And for many hospitals, this really is the difference between them being in the red or being in the black.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, this has been great. Appreciate the audience questions. Any last thoughts from you on the program before we wrap?
I think we talked about a lot today. It's complicated stuff, but I think it's important to take the time to really understand all of the details so you can make meaningful changes to your 340B program. But other than that, Jim, thank you so much for having us. It's been great to kind of share about how we can keep 340B strong for the future. Thank you.
What Nivedha said,
yeah. Yeah, it's definitely needed. And, it's something we have to stay vigilant on, because as things change so rapidly, it's easy to lose sight of this stuff. And once it slips away, it's hard to get it back.
That's right.
So thank you both for your time. Thank you what you do for your clients. And thanks everyone for listening.